In this video, we're going to look at how to work with stored procedures within the entity framework. We're going to look at simple stored procedures that return all columns and all rows for a given table. Real simple scenario. And then we're going to take a look at using input parameters and how to create custom types or complex types based on just a selection of columns, not all of the columns from a given table. So you can kind of get an idea of how to work with the function import dialog to choose existing entities to select values into, or how to create new complex or custom types to select your data into. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Real simple scenario. I've actually created, as you can see, first of all, I'm using the Link to Entities Insert SQL Express project that we've been using for the last video or two, okay? And so I've commented out everything where we've been inserting, updating, and deleting data. Then I went to the Database Explorer and added two stored procedures. Just right click and selected Add New Stored Procedure, and then wrote the SQL get customer, so dbo.getCustomers. I didn't use any input parameters, and I just select star from customers. Very simple scenario. In the other stored procedure, I created a get customer by state, and if you take a look at that one, I'm only choosing first name, last name, and customer ID from customers where the state equals the input parameter at state. And you can see at state defined as an nchar 50, get customers by state. So we'll come to that in just a moment. So if I want to use a stored procedure within my application and I'm using Entity Framework or Link to Entities, this is the process that I would go through. First of all, I'm going to open up my data model, or rather my entity model, and I'm going to right click and select update the model from the database. I'm going to wait for the add tab to refresh, and I'm going to choose the stored procedures and then click finish. Now at this point it should find and import the two stored procedures, and you can see that we get this output message that it generated the model file, loading the metadata, generating the model. Great. And so now what I should be able to do is right click and select add function import. Okay, and so at this point I'm going to choose which of the two stored procedures that I want to include and create classes for within my entity classes. So here I'm going to first choose get customers. Now when I do that, you can see it says click on get column information here in this box below to retrieve the stored procedure schema. Once the schema is available, then click create new complex type to create a compatible complex type. We'll get to that in just a moment. Or you can always update an existing complex type to match the return schema. You might be like, what are they talking about here? So basically it comes down to this. A complex type simply means that it's going to create a new custom class with just those properties defined in that new custom class to duplicate any of the columns that were selected in the query. So we could use create a new custom class called get customers or result. So if I were to, first of all, let me just click the get column information. Okay. Now I can choose to either create a new complex type based on these, or in this case, since I'm pulling back all of the columns and all of the rows, and it matches an entity that I've already got defined in my project, this customer entity, I can just choose an existing entity instead to select these into. I'll select customer. Now we'll use this custom type in the next example here in just a few moments. And then what I want to do is give this a name, this function import a name. Now I like to just name these the exact same thing as what the stored procedure name is, unless I had a reason not to, like our database administrator has some naming convention that he uses to indicate, you know, what application or department they belong to, and I don't want to have all of that ugly information embedded in my code, and I just want the notion of the entity itself, get customers or customer select or something along those lines. So now that I have the function import name selected, which stored procedure I'm going to choose, what it's going to be selected into a customer, then I'm going to click OK. Now notice what opens up is the model browser. We haven't seen that up to this point. The model browser allows us to look at what's going on inside all of the XML that we looked at when we started today, day 10, looking at the entity framework and how it does that mapping between the physical layer and the conceptual layer and all of that. So let's just drill down into this for a moment and take a few seconds to just see what it is that we're working with here. You can see that we have, first of all, something called the customers database model, and then we have the customers database model.store. This has a database cylinder next to it indicating that this is the physical model. So we should be able to look here and see the physical manifestation of our stored procedures, of our tables and views, and so on. Here, however, this is going to be the model view, and so we can look at the entity types that have been defined, the customer entity, for example, and the order entity. And we can select, individual properties of that entity and look at their properties in the property window and so on. Now, for our purposes, I think the most interesting thing is that an entity container is created for customers database entities, and we have this function import down here called get customers. So this exists because we did the add function import from when right-clicking on the diagram and selecting function import and then making our selections. Also, you can see here, we'll get back to this in just a moment, that there is a folder for complex types. There's no complex type just yet. When we get to our next example, you'll see where that gets filled in as well. But it's a way of navigating through and I suppose getting information about entities, even if they don't show up. Because you'll notice that, and I'm going to take this little thumbnail view so I can navigate around my designer area. There is no other entities defined here, so you don't see the stored procedure manifested anywhere here on the model's view area. You can only see it through the model browser. Okay, so anyway, back to the problem at hand. I'm gonna save all the work that we've done up to this point and choose the debug build solution. All right, now I'm going to go over and actually try to run this code, the stored procedure, by doing this. Var customers, var customers equals DE. Remember, DE is our customers database entities. We defined that way here at the top in a previous video. I'm just reusing that line of code. So let's get back here. de.get customers. There it is. And I'm just going to do open close parentheses. And now, what does it return? It returns an object result of type customer. All right, we haven't talked about object results and things of that nature, but essentially this is going to be a list, an enumerable list of customers. So I should be able to do this. And then console.writeLine. And then if I do customer dot, you can see that I would be able to access all of the properties of the customer entity. The customer entity, not a custom entity, because we selected the data, or we're going to select data into existing entities that have been defined previously. So we'll just do, let's show the last name. Now, if indeed that is true, that we are working with an actual entity, then we should be able to navigate through that entity's relationships. For example, we should be able to see how many orders that this particular customer has. So we've done this before. We should be able to do that and print out the number of orders. So what will happen, we haven't retrieved that data yet back yet, so this is going to go back to the database every time I grab a count for a given customer. It's okay in this simplified case because we just want to demonstrate that we're really working with the entity that's defined right here. Okay, so let's save this and then let's run the application and see what we get back. We would expect the 2 rows in our database. Tabor has 3 orders, Jaworski has 2 orders. Awesome. Okay. So let's go ahead and comment that out. So that's the simple case of how we can use a stored procedure in linked to entities, or rather the entity framework. Now let's take a look at an example where we're working with a stored procedure that requires the use of input parameters. So once again, I'm going to right-click, select Add Function Import on our entity diagram. This time I'm going to select Get Customers by State. I'm going to go ahead and give it the name Get Customers by State because I like to name it the same. I'm going to select the Get Column Information, and I'm going to select this time Create New Complex Type. And when I do, notice that it returns a collection of, and automatically complex was selected, and now we get customers by state underscore result. That is the default name of the new type that's going to be created. And so I could rename it at this point if I don't like that naming convention that they've chosen for me. I'm going to leave it the way that it is for now, and I'm going to select OK. So now we have here in our model browser, you can see our function imports include our new get customer by state. I can even look through and see that it has an input parameter of type string. And now the complex types, you can see if I were to expand that, we have a new get customers by state underscore result. So are we returning back customers? Well, we're not returning back a customer entity. We're returning back a new class called get customers by state underscore result. Does it have the same properties? Well, it has a subset of the properties, but it is a different class, a different object altogether, a different entity, so to speak. Okay, so let's go ahead and now utilize that in some code, and it's going to be extremely simple. We're going to do var customers equals de.get customers by state, and I'm going to open a parenthesis and notice that it takes an input parameter of state. So I should be able to just type in like IL, for example, for Illinois, because I know we have at least one customer of the two that are from the state of Illinois in our database, just because we've created the sample data ourselves. Now, if I hover my mouse cursor over, we're going to see that it returns an object result of type get customers by state underscore result, that new complex data type that was created in our import function dialog. So I should be able to do this for each var customer in customers. But wait, we're not working with customers, right? It doesn't matter what I name these. I can name this John if I want to, okay? It's just a name, and I'll be able to get to, for example, customer ID, first name, and last name. Why those? Because those were the properties that were returned from the stored procedure. Therefore, when we created the new custom type, those were the only three properties that were included. Hopefully that makes sense. So we're just going to go ahead and print out the last name with a console.writeLine. Now, to kind of borrow from what we did in the previous example, let's see if we can we navigate from customer to associated orders? Well, no. There's no associated orders because this is not a customer entity like we have defined in our entity model. This is a new custom type. It doesn't have any notion of orders. Sure, we could create one if we took another 5 minutes to do it, but it doesn't just by default, okay? Hopefully that makes sense. Any rate, we'll just go ahead and comment that out, and we'll run our application to make sure that we can indeed execute our get customers by state stored procedure. And we can. Great. All right, so hopefully this is a simple notion. If you ever need to use stored procedures in your applications and you're using the entity framework, it's as simple as that. It does a lot of the hard work for you. If you're using ADO.NET, like ADO.NET 2.0, you have to create your own connection to the database, set the command text. You're going to have to create parameter objects and pass in the values and specify the length and the data type and all of that. It took many lines of code to accomplish what we're able to do, essentially just one line of code, because the beauty of code generation, the entity model, and Visual Studio and the entity framework all working in conjunction to make that process really easy for us. Okay, so that pretty much wraps up my link to entities and the entity framework discussion for day 10. There are many more concepts about the entity framework that we'll need to discuss over time. It deserves its own video series just on that topic, and we'll come back and do a number of 5-day concentrated efforts into the Entity Framework, so you're more familiar with even some more robust functionality, enterprise level functionality. But this should serve you well as we just get started and build simple applications like in Core 2 and Core 3, building Silverlight, ASP.NET, and Windows Forms applications. We should be able to just leverage what we've done here. Okay, so we're going to now move on to a few final topics for day 10 that will give you some instruction on working with strings and dates, and then also packaging your code, which will lead to a larger discussion in the Core 2 video series. We'll see you then. Thank you.